The Parliament of Saints was established in reaction to the dissolving of the Rump Parliament. So the fact that the proposed reforms to the law could not be agreed upon, coupled with the necessity to maintain a large standing army, meant that the Rump was destined to fail. That is a view commonly agreed on by historians. So the army became dissatisfied with the slow pace of reform. Remember that obviously over 100 acts were passed when the Rump Parliament was first established in 1649, and that those acts were then slowed down by the time we get to 1653. And eventually Cromwell reacted to the dissatisfaction amongst the army and closed the Rump down by force in April 1653. However, he didn't really think of an aftermath solution to what would replace the Rump. And Cromwell is someone who's kind of quite highly focused on law and order, which he doesn't feel that the monarchy really settled in their reigns. So Cromwell was advised by the fifth monarchist, who is a millennial. Don't forget the millenarians are also known as fifth monarchists. So Major General Harrison, who was the leader of the fifth monarchist, asked the various churches and radical groups to nominate an assembly of devout men in order to create a godly society. So though it was short-lived, the Parliament of Saints, which replaced the Rump Parliament, passed a number of relatively progressive reforms. So on the one hand, they were successful. On the other hand, they were failures in terms of their achievements. So in terms of success, its members attempted to secure trade routes by continuing a war with the Dutch, who were their main economic competitor. Legal measures to help debtors were introduced as opposed to imprisoning them, which is what used to happen under Charles I. Regulations concerning the treatment of lunatics was also introduced as opposed to imprisonment or other punishments. Civil marriage was also permitted, officiated by justices of the peace. So JPs were kind of the early modern police force, because the police were not established as an institution until the late 1800s. And civil marriage was quite a significant achievement, because obviously if you were of any form of title or any part of the gentry, your marriage would be arranged by the monarchy or would be arranged by other nobles. So the fact that civil marriage became permitted is quite a radical achievement to have done in this time period. Likewise, the assembly included members from Wales, Scotland and Ireland, and this was significant because it made it the first parliament to represent all of Britain, as opposed to it just being the nobility from England. So that was a successful aspect of the Parliament of Saints, and that eased the anxiety and frustrations from the army from the lack of reform presented by the Rump Parliament. However, there were a few issues. So the Parliament of Saints lasted less than 6 months, so we're not really gaining much political stability. It was dissolved by the Conservative members who didn't want change. So the Conservative members would have been what was left of the nobility and the old order of the monarchy advisors, who, as a general rule, even to this day, Conservatives don't like change. And as a result of that, they dissolved the Parliament of Saints as being too radically reformist. Most of its members were also from the lesser gentry, who were conservative by nature and were not interested in reform. They felt that they were reforming because they were reacting to pressures from the army. And the 140 members were not just selected by the independent churches as first suggested when Cromwell dissolved the Rump Parliament. The Council of Officers in the armies added several names, including Cromwell and other senior generals. So you could argue the Parliament of Saints was only gearing towards Cromwell's ideologies. And there was a clear split between the radical saints and the conservative members. The propertied members were unhappy at the suggestion that the assembly abolish tithes. Remember, tithes are obviously a taxation for the church, which were key to their financial well-being. So the radical saints, as such, who kind of wanted much more freedom in terms of their religious beliefs and their religious ways of worshipping, didn't believe they should be paying tithes for a church that they shouldn't attend, that they wouldn't be attending. And as a result of that, the Conservatives became frustrated by that because they believed tithes was a key component of their financial income. So that created a bit of tension. So the Parliament of Saints while short-lived, definitely did produce some success, but ultimately it couldn't have achieved much more in the short time that they were in session. Now, in response to the Parliament of Saints, Major General John Lambert produced the Instrument of Government 3 days later after the Parliament of Saints was dissolved, and this then formed a new constitution. So the constitution would be the rules and laws of England and this society, and it was modelled on the heads of proposals issued by Ireton in 1647, so revisit your Year 12 booklet for more information on that, and served as the basis for Cromwell's power. So it basically clearly identified what Cromwell's powers were, what he was unable to do. So it kind of established Cromwell's power, what his limitations were, what the role of Parliament was, etc. And the executive authority was given to Cromwell as Lord Protector. So he's effectively taken over the role as head of state, with a council state or a cabinet of 21 members that would be his key advisors. So we still have a single chamber parliament, so the House of Lords hasn't been restored by this point, it's still the House of Commons, and this acted as the legislative branch of government, so the area that creates laws, which had 460 members across England, Wales and Scotland. So it's much more democratic than what we've experienced under the previous monarchs. Parliaments were to be elected every 3 years by voters with at least £200 of private property. So the democratic process is still fairly limited in the fact that commoners wouldn't have been able to have voted. But the fact that parliaments were elected every 3 years kind of prevented that absolutism from returning, like we have seen under the previous monarchs. Cromwell, as well as Lord Protector, would also remain head of the new model army. So a lot of the power is centralised around Cromwell. And it was agreed under this constitution that upon Cromwell's death, a new protector would be elected by the Council of State, which is his cabinet ministers, if you like, his advisors. So that kind of eased Parliament's anxiety surrounding succession like they had under Charles, where it was fairly certain that a Catholic monarch would return to power. But there was also agreement that there would be a Presbyterian state church, so a form of Protestantism, but freedom of worship was granted for all except Catholics. Now, Catholics would obviously not have been permitted to have been kind of freely permitted within society or politics at this time, because obviously there would then be the argue, well, why can the monarch not restore its power, as opposed to Cromwell being the Lord Protector? So ultimately, we end up with the Instrument of Government being the final governmental agreement, and this then launched a new constitution to prevent the restoration of the monarchy.